Chapter 1: The Abandoned Hospital. It was a dark and stormy night when a group of friends decided to explore an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The hospital had been closed for years, and rumors circulated that it was haunted by the ghosts of patients who had died there. The friends had heard stories about the hospital, tales of strange noises and ghostly apparitions. They were curious and wanted to see for themselves if the rumors were true. So, they gathered their courage and set off into the night. As they approached the hospital, they could see its dark silhouette looming against the stormy sky. The building was old and decrepit, its windows shattered and its walls covered in vines. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The friends hesitated for a moment, wondering if they should turn back. But their curiosity got the better of them, and they pushed open the creaky gates and made their way inside. As they stepped into the dark, musty corridors of the hospital, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with an eerie presence, and they could hear strange noises coming from the shadows. They cautiously made their way deeper into the hospital, their flashlights illuminating the way. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the halls, and the friends froze in terror. They quickly realized that they were not alone in the hospital. Chapter 2: The Ghostly Apparition. As the friends cautiously made their way deeper into the hospital, they heard strange noises and saw shadowy figures darting around corners. The air was thick with an eerie presence, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, a ghostly apparition appeared before them, its translucent form hovering in the air. The friends were paralyzed with fear as the ghostly figure began to speak. Its voice was faint and distant, as if it were speaking from another world. It told them of the horrors that had taken place in the hospital and warned them to leave before it was too late. But the friends were curious and wanted to know more. They asked the ghostly figure to tell them its story, and it began to recount the tale of its tragic death. The ghost had been a patient at the hospital, admitted for a routine operation. But something had gone wrong during the procedure, and the patient had died on the operating table. The doctors had tried to cover up their mistake, but the patient's spirit had remained trapped within the hospital, unable to move on. The friends listened in horror as the ghostly apparition told its tale. They knew that they had to leave before it was too late, but they couldn't resist the urge to explore further. They thanked the ghost for its warning and continued on their journey through the haunted hospital. Chapter 3: The Haunted Operating Room. Ignoring the ghost's warning, the friends continued their exploration of the hospital. They eventually came across an old operating room, its walls stained with dried blood and its instruments rusted and corroded. As they stepped into the room, they felt a sudden chill run down their spines. The air was thick with an eerie presence, and they could hear faint whispers and moans coming from the shadows. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. The friends frantically searched for a way out of the operating room, but all the doors and windows were sealed shut. They were trapped, with no way to escape. As they huddled together in fear, they heard strange noises coming from the shadows. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared before them, its translucent form hovering in the air. It was the spirit of a patient who had died on the operating table, unable to move on. The ghostly figure began to speak, telling them of the horrors that had taken place in that very room. The friends listened in terror as the ghostly apparition recounted its tale. They knew that they had to find a way out before it was too late. But as they searched for an escape, they could feel the presence of other spirits closing in around them. Chapter 4: The Possessed Patient. As the friends frantically searched for a way out of the operating room, they heard a loud banging coming from one of the cabinets. When they opened it, they found a patient strapped to a gurney, his eyes wild and his body writhing in agony. The patient began to speak in a voice that was not his own, telling them of the terrible experiments that had been performed on him by the hospital's doctors. He begged for their help, but as they reached out to touch him, he suddenly disappeared into thin air. The friends were shaken by what they had seen and knew that they had to find a way out before it was too late. They continued their search for an escape, but the hospital seemed to be alive with malevolent spirits, determined to keep them trapped within its walls. As they made their way through the dark corridors, they could hear strange noises and see shadowy figures darting around corners. They knew that they were not alone in the hospital and that they had to be careful if they wanted to make it out alive. Chapter 5: The Cursed Ward. The friends finally managed to escape from the operating room and continued their exploration of the hospital. They eventually came across a ward that had been sealed off from the rest of the building. The door was locked and covered in warning signs, but they managed to break it open. As they stepped inside, they were overcome by a sense of dread. The ward was filled with empty beds and abandoned medical equipment, but there was something sinister lurking in the shadows. They could hear faint whispers and cries coming from all around them, as if the spirits of the patients who had died there were still trapped within its walls. The friends cautiously made their way through the cursed ward, their flashlights illuminating the way. As they passed by each bed, they could feel the presence of the spirits growing stronger. They knew that they had to be careful if they wanted to make it out alive. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared before them, its translucent form hovering in the air. It was the spirit of a patient who had died in that very ward, unable to move on. The ghostly figure began to speak, telling them of the horrors that had taken place within those walls. The friends listened in terror as the ghostly apparition recounted its tale. They knew that they had to find a way out before it was too late. But as they searched for an escape, they could feel the presence of other spirits closing in around them. Chapter 6: The Doctor's Secret. As the friends made their way through the cursed ward, they came across an old office belonging to one of the hospital's doctors. The room was filled with dusty books and papers, and as they began to search through them, they discovered a terrible secret. The doctor had been performing illegal experiments on his patients, using them as guinea pigs for his twisted research. He had kept detailed records of his work, documenting every procedure and every death. The friends were horrified by what they had found and knew that they had to leave before it was too late. They quickly gathered up the evidence and made their way back through the hospital, trying to find a way out. But as they ran through the dark corridors, they could hear footsteps following close behind them. They turned around to see a group of ghostly figures chasing after them, their faces twisted in anger and pain. The friends ran faster than ever before, their hearts pounding with fear. They finally burst through the front doors of the hospital and into the night air. They didn't stop running until they were far away from that cursed place. Chapter 7: The Aftermath. After their terrifying experience at the haunted hospital, the friends vowed never to return. They tried to forget what they had seen and heard within its walls, but found that it was impossible to shake off. They began to have nightmares about their encounter with the ghostly apparitions and could still hear their whispers in their minds. They knew that they would never be able to forget what had happened at that abandoned hospital on that dark and stormy night. The friends decided to go to the authorities with the evidence they had found in the doctor's office. They hoped that by exposing the truth, they could bring some closure to the spirits that were trapped within the hospital's walls. But when they presented their evidence, they were met with skepticism and disbelief. The authorities refused to believe their story and dismissed them as pranksters or attention seekers. The friends were devastated and knew that they had to find another way to bring justice to the spirits of the hospital. Chapter 8: The Return. Years passed, and the friends tried to move on with their lives. But the memories of that night at the haunted hospital never faded. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had left something unfinished, that there was still something they needed to do. One of the friends, unable to let go of the past, decided to return to the hospital alone. He wanted to find out more about what had happened there, to uncover the truth and bring closure to the spirits that were trapped within its walls. He made his way back to the abandoned hospital, determined to find answers. As he stepped inside, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine. The air was thick with an eerie presence, and he could hear strange noises coming from the shadows. He cautiously made his way deeper into the hospital, his flashlight illuminating the way. As he passed by each room, he could feel the presence of the spirits growing stronger. He knew that he had to be careful if he wanted to make it out alive. Chapter 9: The Final Encounter. As the friend made his way deeper into the hospital, he heard strange noises and saw shadowy figures darting around corners. Suddenly, a ghostly apparition appeared before him, its translucent form hovering in the air. The friend was paralyzed with fear as the ghostly figure began to speak. Its voice was faint and distant, as if it were speaking from another world. It told him of the horrors that had taken place in the hospital and warned him to leave before it was too late. But the friend didn't listen to the ghost's warning and continued his exploration of the hospital. He eventually came across an old operating room, its walls stained with dried blood and its instruments rusted and corroded. As he stepped into the room, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine. The air was thick with an eerie presence, and he could hear faint whispers and moans coming from the shadows. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. He never returned back from that hospital again. His friends never knew what happened to him, but they all knew that he should have never returned back to that cursed place. Chapter 10: The End. After the disappearance of their friend, the remaining friends were devastated. They knew that they had to do something to bring closure to the spirits that were trapped within the hospital's walls. They decided to go back to the authorities with the evidence they had found in the doctor's office. This time, they were determined to make them listen. They presented their evidence and told their story, refusing to back down until they were heard. Finally, the authorities agreed to investigate the hospital. They sent a team of experts to examine the building and uncover the truth about what had happened there. The investigation revealed the terrible secrets that had been hidden within its walls, and the hospital was finally shut down for good. The friends felt a sense of relief knowing that justice had been served. They knew that their friend's sacrifice had not been in vain and that the spirits of the hospital could finally rest in peace.